If you are a Protestant, you've probably heard some variation of read the church fathers and you'll stop being a Protestant. Cardinal Henry Newman famously said to be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant. That has been used as a sword against Protestants for a long time at this point. But this is a myth, and a bad one at that, and today I'm going to show you why. But before diving into it, welcome to Canon and Creed. My name is Miles, and this is the channel where we are bullish on recovering classical Protestant faith practice and piety, all in a digestible manner. So if that sort of thing interests you, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which Christian tradition you're listening from. So this video will not be an exhaustive treatment of the Fathers, but it will give you a solid understanding of the Protestant posture toward them, and why the common caricature does not hold up. I want to break this down into three sections. First, I want to look at what the Reformers themselves said, followed by why Protestants read the Fathers differently than other Christian traditions, and lastly, why this myth about Protestants and the Fathers continues to persist. So let's start with the claim Protestants don't read the Fathers because they know the Fathers aren't Protestant. This is true only if you're talking about modern evangelicalism, not the historic confessional tradition, and it's time we stop conflating the two. From the beginning, the Reformers read and engaged with the Fathers, not as infallible oracles, but as theological witness. In his Confession of the Christian Religion, Italian reformer Jerome Zanchi says that while Scripture alone is infallible, faithful interpretations by devout theologians, especially those aligned with Scripture and the creeds, are valuable and shouldn't be dismissed. And this is a Reformed Augustinian and Catholic vision of theology. Scripture is supreme, but it's never divorced from the Church's historical witness. Lutheran reformer Martin Chemnitz, in his examination of the Council of Trent, which typically drives Catholic apologists nuts, opposes elevating tradition alongside Scripture, but then proceeds to defend his position by citing dozens of the Church Fathers. So the same principle being found amongst the Lutheran tradition. The Fathers matter, but they are ministerial, not magisterial. They serve the Scriptures. They don't rule over them. In Article 9 of the Belgic Confession, we read that the Reformed not only accept the three ecumenical creeds of the Christian faith, but also what the ancient Fathers decided in agreement with them. So classical Protestants are not only confessionally rooted in the Fathers, especially the creeds they produced, but we also accept their writings when they align with the rule of faith. That would be an awfully strange thing to confess if one wanted to avoid such men or was afraid of them. In the Second Helvetic Confession, another Reformed confession, we read, "Likewise, we do not despise the sayings of the Holy Greek and Latin Fathers, nor reject their teachings insofar as they agree with the Scriptures, but we modestly dissent from them when they are found to set down things differing from or altogether contrary to the Scriptures." And this has always been the Protestant posture toward the Fathers. They are important, but they're not the rule of faith and they're not infallible. Scripture is infallible and the rule of faith is Scripture and the creeds. And as we've seen, that doesn't mean that the Fathers hold no value or authority. I often run into this problem and I don't understand why people go along these lines. They think if an authority's not infallible, then it's not actually an authority. That's not true. Most of the authorities that God has set up in the world are not infallible. Parents are not infallible. The government is not infallible. Ministers are not infallible. Yet they all hold valid authority. Which brings us really to the second part, why Protestants read the Fathers differently than Roman Catholics or the Orthodox. And a key figure to help explain this is French reformer John Daly. In his treatise on the right use of the Fathers, Daly gives us three guiding principles. The first is that the Fathers are fallible. The second is they sometimes contradict each other. And the third is that their claims must be examined by Scripture. In light of this, he writes that one should have a reverent esteem of them and their writings as they deserve, yet we are to examine their writings by those principles from whence they draw their conclusions, and not to rest satisfied with their bare assertions until we have discovered them to be true. This concept, the right use, is core to Reformed Catholicity. The Fathers are voices in the great conversation, but not the final word. Which brings me to the third and final section. Why do some Roman Catholics and Orthodox continue to claim that Protestants fear the Fathers? Well, it's because of a deeper assumption that if the early church doesn't sound exactly like Reformational theology, then Protestantism must be false. But historic Protestants don't share that assumption. We believe in doctrinal development that's anchored in Scripture and not overridden by tradition. Our theology is rooted in both, but Scripture is supreme. That's why we're not scandalized when the Fathers disagree, either with us or even with each other. And it's why we're not alarmed when they sound like products of their time. Every tradition has to wrestle with this. Present-day Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy do not look identical to all the Fathers either. We all have to quote-unquote cherry-pick, and we cite where we think something supports our belief. All of us do this. It's why the Reformed Catholic tradition holds to a branch theory of church history. The church didn't vanish after the apostles, but it also didn't freeze in time. It's a living, breathing, growing organism that exists in the world. And like a tree, it grew with healthy branches, diseased ones, and then pruning through Reformation. The Fathers are a part of that growth on the same tree. Church historian Philip Schaff put it well in his History of the Christian Church, where he says that the unanimous consent of the Fathers is a mere illusion, except on the most fundamental articles of general Christianity. And he even goes on to point out that none of the Ante-Nicene Fathers entirely align with Rome or with Protestants. That's not a crisis, it's just history. So this myth about Protestants being afraid of the Fathers persists because, like I mentioned in another video, the word Protestant has lost any meaningful definition. Anything not Roman Catholic or Orthodox that professes to be Christian just gets shoved under this same umbrella. But Protestants are not modern evangelicals, and I understand not all evangelicals are the same either, but my point is that Protestants have our own distinct history and identity that sees itself attached to those that came before us, which is why we read the Fathers, we quote them, we honor them, but we don't canonize them. Here is a selection of some of my personal favorites from my own library. We don't read the Fathers expecting perfect agreement. We read them seeking faithful continuity and guidance, but always under the supreme authority of Scripture, which is why, if you are a Protestant, you don't need to convert, nor do you need to be afraid of the Fathers, you just need to remember.